So yeah, Aberfeldy 12 is probably the newest thing that we're bringing in from yours because it's a great price point for what you're getting out of it, I think. So if you want to give us a little more color on Aberfeldy 12.
Sure. And just so people can see just from a visual standpoint, so this is the Aberfeldy 12. It's black with gold. And then this is the single cast that we were talking about earlier. So it's just reversed. So the single casts are looks is similar but slightly different branding. So yeah, this is the 12-year-old, and this is like Royal Brockla. It's one of our Highland distilleries. So Aberfeldy again is the village, and it's probably about an hour and a half north of Edinburgh and Glasgow. So right when you're headed up, maybe to Inverness or right up into the Cairngorms Park. So Aberfeldy, we had touched on it briefly, but it's known as the golden dram. It's known as to have these rich and, of course, naturally occurring, we are not adding honey, of course, these naturally occurring honeyed notes. And there's a few reasons for that. We have quite long fermentations, so typically over 72 hours, it'll change, and that's long for Scotland, right? Every country and new craft distilleries, of course, will go longer, but usually the range is upwards of 80 hours. So we like to encourage some of those fruitier sorts of notes in fermentation. Tall stills, slow distillation runs, not as tall as Royal Brockla, but it's just known right off the still, it has this sweet honeyed fruit quality. And we age in a 50-50 split of ex-bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks, as we've discussed for the other brands. And the ex-bourbon just continues to amplify those sweet honeyed notes. So, this is the whiskey that I say we can trick bourbon drinkers into. I do some blind tastings. You'll be at a trade show or whatnot, and we know that bourbon drinker that comes by and says, I only like bourbon, and I say, oh, really? I'll just cover it. So I won't tell them what it is. Just try this. And on the notes,
our new Scottish bourbon.
yes. Yeah. And of course, we can never be as sweet as bourbon, right? We're not corn, we're not new charred oak, but we actually do use, it's not new charred oak, but we do use some rechar ex-bourbon casks. So I feel like maybe that's a
That
little
makes
bit
sense.
of
Yeah.
but it's, a lot of rich honeyed notes on the nose, and then more of the sherry steps forward on the finish, which is, more of that grit, some of that baking spice, cinnamon, dried fruit sort of quality. So it's really kind of it pleases every crowd that you could be with. Your American whiskey drinker, your Scotch drinker, your new to whiskey drinker. We have a whole cocktail program with this one too, which has been really fun to amplify those honeyed notes, called Barrels and Bees. So it's probably our most well-known of the brands, just because it can fit so many occasions, for sure.
And a huge component to Dewar's, right?
Yeah, so it was founded in 1898, and actually John Dewar, Senior, who founded the Dewar's Blend, he was a grocer in Perth. So in the 1830s, mid 1800s, he started blending and making Dewar's. After a few decades, his two sons got into the business, and he wanted to start to control some supply chain, right, and have some better bartering tools. So Aberfeldy is actually not far from where their father grew up, where John Dewar's from. And so there had been a distillery there before. So it already had a good water source. It's the Patilly Burn, which is where our distillery sits to this day. We still pull our water from there. We do have a secondary source, but that's our main water source. And it founded in 1898 by his two sons. So it historically has always been tied to Dewar's. So it's always been a component, but it's not always the core malt. So it just depends, what the blender decides and who is the blender, right? We've had 7 so far, which is not that many considering we've been around for, since the 1830s for Dewar's.
But it was one I remember talking to a customer who's probably one of the most educated people on booze in general, and the Aberfeldy 12 had kind of slipped under his radar. He got a bottle of it, I think, while he was studying for WSET or something, and kind of tried a little and was like, okay, and was trying a bunch of stuff and moved on. And then more recently, I think because I was talking about it more, he went back to it and was like, that's amazing. And I don't know, just him going back to it with a different context or a little bit of time in the bottle. But he went back to it and completely blown away. So it's, yeah, I think it's out there. You see it on bars a lot more, but it's great introduction, and it's great deserving of time if you've tried a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, and it's so versatile. I mean, it's at a price point where, neat on the rocks, of course, you're going to get lots of flavors. It's not boring whatsoever. Lots of nice, rich flavors. But then you feel okay putting it into a cocktail, right? Which, normally scotch is just too expensive to put into a cocktail. And a lot of people in our industry for a long time told you not to, which we shouldn't have been telling people what to do with the thing that they just purchased. But
Always the best way to get into trouble.
but we saw a lot of bartenders around the world, and you experienced this at our Barrels and Bees event, starting to use honey to amplify those nice, sweet, suckle honey notes that are naturally there in every Aberfeldy offering. And it was so cool for us to see it, have a 12-year-old age statement single malt scotch be in these amazing honeyed old fashions, iced toddies, flipping the hot toddy on its head. I mean, there's lots of ways we saw people taking it. And, that just opens it up to a new group of people that a lot of people think all scotch is peated, and it's all aggressive, and then it's all going to attack your face and your nose. And to this day we fight that. And it is not like that, as we just talked to, all the different flavor profiles we discussed.